Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tax Talk, broadcast by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. My name is Jordan Bateman, and I'm the British Columbia Director of the CTF. And joining us, as always, Paige MacPherson, the Alberta Director of the CTF. How you doing, Paige?
I'm doing well. It's -20 here in Calgary, so I could be a little bit better. Kind of wishing I was in Vancouver with you or Langley.
Oh, yes, it is a +4 and drizzly as the weather in Vancouver is from approximately Thanksgiving to Victoria Day. So not much changes here. Although I have to say we broke our streak of no snow.
Really?
After 56 weeks, we had more than a trace of snow. We had a shocking 3 millimeters. And that's enough to break the snow streak over Christmas.
And everybody didn't know how to drive, and the city shut down.
Literally the SkyTrain shut down briefly. It was it's insane. It's insane, and it's the reason the rest of the nation just adores us and pats us on our head and sends us on our way in BC.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us here on Blab for Tax Talk. Today, we're going to be joined by, hopefully, the CTF's research director. We're having some technical difficulties connecting with Ottawa. And let me tell you, that's a good metaphor for most of Canada, problems connecting with Ottawa. But Jeff Bowes is going to be hopefully with us to talk about some pretty sweeping changes that the Trudeau government is making to the tax code. I know in my 5 years or 4 years here with the CTF, I've never seen a federal tax change, a series of changes as in-depth and as comprehensive as this one. So Jeff ran 36 different income scenarios to find out what these tax changes mean to individual Canadians and their families. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to make some 2016 predictions, including we're going to weigh into the U.S. presidential race because we want to know, are our American neighbors going to be trumped? Are we going to have a Canadian president? Ted Cruz, is he going to come out of nowhere, or is he going to win this thing and secretly help us with the Canadian takeover of the United States? Very important issues. But lots of ways for you to connect with us. If you've joined us here live, you can be sure to subscribe to our feed on Blab and keep track of all our shows. You can comment in the sidebar. If you type /Q in the chat, you'll actually get added to our question queue. And just to let you know, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to just three things: lower taxes, less waste, and more government accountability. That's what frames all of the work we do across the country. It drives all of our advocacy and communications and research. You can check out our website at taxpayer.com, see everything that Paige and I and our other directors are working on. And you can listen to this as well later on as a podcast on iTunes. You can check it out on YouTube, on Facebook. We're everywhere. Just search for taxpayer.com and you'll find us. Paige, what's new?
Well, there's an issue that really, as a radio host here in Calgary, said to me, gets Albertans' blood boiling, or at least that of her listeners. And that's the issue of equalization. So it's obviously an issue that, we come back to at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation a lot. It's a very large, very expensive government program. Of course, it was sort of brought about in the Depression, kind of formalized in the 1950s as a way to, equalize the provinces. So the wealthier provinces, sometimes called the have provinces, give money to Ottawa. Ottawa redistributes that money to the less wealthy provinces, the have-nots, just as a way of making sure that the provinces have basically equal level of services. But of course, there's a lot of issues with this program. It's really served as kind of a regional wealth transfer, kind of like a federal welfare program. And it incentivizes bad behavior in a lot of cases because the less wealthy, the have-not provinces have less of an incentive, obviously, to get their finances back on track because there's nothing attached to the payment. I mean, they can pretty much do whatever they want with their finances. They can spend like crazy. They're still going to get the money. But what's new here is that equalization payments are actually going up. And this is an issue here in Alberta. I know it's going to be an issue in BC and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland, the have provinces, because at least here in Alberta, our economy is really struggling. Obviously, the price of oil is down. We have a very tax-happy government in place now who's spending big time. And the economy really is struggling. And yet, Albertans are still paying more for equalization. So our equalization payments are now up to $499 per person. And that's money that goes to Ottawa. Now that's every Canadian, don't get me wrong, that's every taxpayer in Canada, but some of the provinces get the money, some provinces don't get anything back from that, right? So provinces like PEI, Quebec, Manitoba, they get a lot more back on a per capita basis than they actually contribute. Albertans contribute, now it's going to be nearly $500, but don't get anything back, despite the fact that our economy is struggling. So we've got our government here in the province saying pretty much diddly squat about that, but then you've got Brad Wall next door in Saskatchewan saying, this is an issue, our economy is struggling, shouldn't we get some of that money back? So it's kind of interesting. I mean, I think that it's good that at least Brad Wall is kind of getting the conversation started. This is really, I think, where the conversations should be started in these provinces that are still struggling, yet still paying more.
Yeah, I agree. And there's always a lag, right? I mean, these stats are a year or two old. So Alberta, who's been struggling, then suddenly comes in and all of a sudden that money that it didn't really matter if it was flowing out of the province becomes very important. I am concerned from a British Columbia point of view, which, thanks to basically the hot real estate market and some very, strong fiscal policies from the BC Liberal government, number one in the country, 3% growth rate. Hey, Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Jeff.
Jeff, can you hear us?
Jeff can't hear us. All right, I'm going to type something to him.
I will continue to expound on the equalization formula and what a disaster it is for Western provinces. Equalization, of course, flows generally east. Funnily enough, there was a big article just a few weeks ago about Ontario moving from a have-not to a have, not because of anything they've done, but simply because everyone else is doing so, starting to do worse and worse. So, under the system, you have to have a certain number of haves and a certain number of have-nots. This is the big problem. So I'm concerned from a British Columbian point of view that, look, we're going to be burdened with more and more of paying for the bills for places like Quebec, like Ontario, and frankly, Alberta hasn't been well run in recent years either. So.
Well, exactly. So it's interesting. The reason that, it doesn't, there's that lag there is actually because the provinces, the have-nots, complained at one time that it was very difficult for them to do their budgeting with volatile changes in the economy. So they wanted the prices to be averaged out over 3 years, which is why in Alberta, this year we're really struggling, but, the past few years we haven't been struggling, obviously. So that's why, we get to this year, we're still paying more, and yet we really can't afford to do so. So it's kind of, an unfair program in that way too. You get a lot of people in the have provinces, particularly in Western Canada, who are disgruntled about that, for good reason, because it's not really fair. It's sort of set up to benefit the have-not provinces. And there's an interesting thing about Ontario. So Ontario actually, they are a have-not province, but they actually do, I believe, contribute more than they actually get back. So it's just like this really complicated system. Yeah. I used to work at a think tank in Halifax, and being in Eastern Canada, especially in the Maritimes, equalization was a big topic for us. And, we would always say that nobody can understand equalization, even, the equalization experts in Canada, of which there might be like 3. So it's a complicated program, but it does, there's regional tension there. So I think that, that's probably the biggest reason why we should start having these conversations about how we can improve it.
Yeah. It must seem so foreign, hey, to, Americans, for example, the thought of states sending money to one another, high performing states sending money to poorly performing states just would never, ever happen. And it's a real sign of just how different the evolution of Canada was from America. Jeff, can you hear us now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, yeah.
I've learned that Firefox doesn't work very well with this.
Fair enough. That's actually good to know. Jeff, any thoughts? We're talking about equalization. Any random thoughts about the Canadian equalization system?
Well, it's not working very well. I don't think we'll see any improvements in the system under the Trudeau government. Unfortunately, we'll probably see much of the same what we've seen recently. So.
That's a good point, because it is such a regionally divided kind of a makeup of our country right now, in that obviously, most of Alberta didn't vote Liberal, but all of Atlantic Canada voted Liberal. Although Newfoundland and Labrador, like, they are a have province now, part of Atlantic Canada. But, you know, then you've got the Maritime provinces. So I agree. There's not much political incentive there for Trudeau. So what we were saying, Jeff, that you might have missed is that Brad Wall in Saskatchewan is saying that, you know, while our economies are struggling in Alberta and Saskatchewan, maybe we shouldn't be actually contributing more. Maybe we should be getting some of that money back. Do you think that that idea has any merit?
Yeah, well, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, as I think I overheard you saying, there's necessarily a lag in the system. It can't be that responsive. It's just kind of the nature of how it works. Really, the only answer there is to just not have equalization.
The debate is so frustrating to me, particularly because I think that equalization actually is, even though, you know, I'm in Alberta and, you know, there's people that are disgruntled about it here, I actually think it's more harmful to the have-not provinces who have this sort of, you know, kind of propping them up and allowing their governments to be fiscally irresponsible because of the system that's in place. But it is frustrating because it's one of those things that, you know, we talk about it and there's very little political will to change it. I mean, that has become evidently clear.
Well, it's so complex. The public has no.
For sure.
I mean, look, we study the tax system every single day. We can barely put into words what equalization means or what the formula is all about. You know, heaven help the average person, and without the average person bringing pressure to bear, politicians will never change.
Yeah. Well, that's depressing. What's new with you, Jordan?
Well, I want to talk about the low Canadian dollar, and I want to talk. Speaking of handouts from taxpayers, about an industry that is, quote unquote, licking their chops about the low Canadian dollar, and that's the film industry in British Columbia. So the BC film industry just 2 years ago, when the dollar was at par, was crying and sobbing for more tax credits from the government. The BC Liberal government, to their credit, said no. You know, we'll stay the course and see what happens. The problem is, staying the course means that for every British Columbian employed by the film industry, taxpayers cut a check back to the big companies employing them for 58.5% of their salaries. So if you've got someone working on a film who made $100,000, Sony or Disney or, you know, Universal or whatever the big studio is, receives a check from taxpayers for $58,500. This is a big problem. Obviously, first of all, you know, you don't want to be subsidizing certain industries over others. Certainly for not that kind of amount. It's not revenue positive for the BC Treasury. It creates economic spin-off, but not all that spin-off has, you know, tax implications that end up in the Treasury. So the Treasury is actually spending about $400 million a year on these tax credits, and they're not getting anywhere near that back, which is, I know this to be a fact because the film industry promised reports proving that they were getting it back, and then those reports never materialized. So you kind of know where those went. But with the low Canadian dollar, this is a huge boom for the American companies who want to film here, because of course they can buy 40% more labor here than they could for cheaper than they could a couple of years ago. So I'm going to circle back to this. I'm working on a bit of an op-ed on it now, saying, look, if there was ever a time where we're going to start weaning these companies off of this tax credit, now is the time. Many U.S. states, 5 years ago, there was only a handful of U.S. states that had film tax credits, or 10 years ago. 5 years ago, there was 47 of the 50 that did. And now that's fallen to about 30. As Treasury's, finance Treasury ministers across, well, they're not ministers, but, you know, Treasury officials across the United States have realized that it doesn't bring in the kind of money that people think. So we're going to circle back to that. And as a little bit of a preview, remember the Sony email hacks?
Yeah.
From last year? The media kind of focused on the ones where, Sony executives would call certain actors fat and pains and stuff like that. Interestingly enough, also included in that document dump was a bunch of ImageWorks Canada documents. So Sony Canada documents, which actually show how the tax credits work on real films. So we're going to probably put out a few of those numbers. And I've seen copies of multi-million-dollar checks from the CRA, the taxpayers of Canada, to Sony, which is a bit hard to swallow when you think that we're cutting checks to these companies for $5, $6, $7 million at a time.
Wow. Well, that explains why, basically every film you see that looks like it might be, somewhere in the States. I mean, they do East Coast, West Coast, they're all filmed in BC on the credits when you actually watch for it. So I have a question. So I used to live in Vancouver, and my first day that I was there, I went for brunch, and I was by myself. So I sat at the bar and was talking to the bartender, and he was something aspiring in the film industry. And he was telling me about how, Vancouver's always been Hollywood North, but now it's transitioning to Toronto, and everything's happening in Toronto. And he's thinking about moving to Toronto. And I warned him about winter, as we were talking about. But what I was, I've always been wondering since then, is there some kind of a competition there? Like, would that be driving the BC government at all for these tax credits to be sort of competing with Toronto for these film jobs?
Well, that's exactly what happens. And this is the way the film companies love it, right? So Ontario brings in a tax credit, and then BC has to match or beat it. And then Quebec wants to beat that. And they basically the old whipsaw, raising the level of these tax credits, which is what you saw in the States as well. So, you want to be competitive. Like, film industry people, and quite rightly, will say, look, we get on a plane with a bag full of money and we can go anywhere in the world and film. It's not like, oil or trees, you don't have to have that natural resource here. But at some point, the local industry has to be able to stand on their own and say, look, we've got, expertise here, talent, experience. They came back recently and filmed the new X-Files 6-episode series that's going to be on Fox this year. They had people working on that. I read a great article, people working on that who worked on the old show 10 years ago. And then other people who worked on the show 10 years ago who couldn't work on it because they were working on movies in Vancouver and all these other things. They, kind of hit the big time. And, now they're working on X-Men movies or Spider-Man movies and things like that. So there's I believe the funny thing is people who don't want to see this kind of corporate welfare for the film industry actually believe in the talent more than the talent themselves, right? Like, I believe that this industry can probably stand on their own, especially given, 70-cent dollars. They don't need the tax credit from taxpayers as much, or they don't need them at all, like they may have needed or had the argument for when it was $1.10 labor. So kind of something I'm mulling over. And look, if the BC government doesn't start ratcheting down now, forget it. We'll have this tax credit around forever. And that's not a good policy going forward.
Yeah, no, it's a good opportunity to get in there and knock some sense into the government.
Yeah, well, and it's a money loser. And, the scary part is, okay, great. Now we're even more attractive to American companies coming in. So that means 400 million, 500 million, 600, like what will be the end amount for us in cutting checks back to these big companies?
Yeah.
Michigan had a big fight with Disney over one of the movies they did there. And Michigan's tax credit, Michigan almost bankrupt, right? Cutting a check to Disney on a movie that they made a fortune on. It's bad. And if people actually sit down and think about it, they go, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. Why should a company get, more than half of the money back from the wages?
Yeah, of all the different priorities with government funds, probably wealthy film companies, not number one on the list.
Yeah. Jeff, read anything interesting lately? Anything percolating in your mind?
One of the big stories federally is Bombardier really begging the federal government for a bailout. And unfortunately, I suspect they'll end up getting it. The Conservatives did this. There's been a long history of liberal governments doing this. And really, it's Bombardier has a struggling airline business, and it's just, it's not, they can't get private investment. And for some reason, the taxpayers are going to cover it. And the Quebec government's already put up some money, and then they're asking for federal money as well.
I love the video that Federal Director Aaron Woodrick did for us.
Yes, everybody who's listening should go and watch this video.
Yeah, it's on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/taxpayer.com. But essentially, Woody puts on a Santa suit like the Salvation Army fundraisers do, and goes out with bells and a can on the streets of Ottawa asking for money for a Bombardier bailout. And shockingly, what's the total, Jeff? How much has he raised now for Bombardier?
I forget, but we're definitely short. It's less than $10.
Oh,
and
this is disastrous for Bombardier.
They're looking for a lot more than that.
Yeah, it kind of tells you that where taxpayers are at, right? If we had to actually sign a check to Bombardier, each of us personally, we would never do it in a million years. But because our politicians get our checkbook, I guess they feel like they can.
Can I ask a little off-topic question here, Jeff? You just took a drink, and it looks a lot like beer. I have to ask: is it just a really hard Friday for you?
Family podcast.
No, it is a little later here, but no, it's tea, just in a clear glass.
All right. Well,
So hipster of you, tea in a clear glass.
it's all happening here. It's all happening. All right. What are we doing next here? Oh yeah. So 2016 predictions, but I thought we would start with year-end tax changes. This is poor Jeff. Jeff ran 34 income scenarios.
Yeah.
You poor human being. Is it fair to say, I can tell you in my 4 years, I've never seen as complicated a set of changes federally as this year, and I'm wondering if we've ever seen this kind of complicated set of changes.
No, I don't think. I can't think of anything this complicated, and it's complicated because there's a lot of different kind of changes. There's both changes to income tax rates, changes to child benefits, to tax credits, and those all combine. And with income testing, it makes it incredibly complicated, and it really depends on your income and your family composition whether you'll be better off or worse off this year.
Yeah. So basically, if you're a middle-class family with kids who wasn't income splitting, you're probably making out pretty well. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. Really, if you have kids, unless your family income is over $200,000 or you're income splitting, you're going to be better off. And some people, even if they were income splitting and they weren't getting the full benefit of that, they'll probably be better off as well. But the calculations are extremely complicated. You're really not going to know until you do your taxes if in your specific circumstances, if you're going to be better off or not.
Yeah. Now, is this for the 2016 tax year or for the 2015 tax year?
Yeah. So these are the changes we're taking the changes took into consideration what the 2016 tax year will be as compared to the 2015 tax year. And that gets even more complicated because especially the child benefit changes don't happen until halfway through the year.
But at least they get one more year of income splitting. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well,
this year.
For the 2015 year income, the family income splitting is still there.
Right.
But it will be gone in 2016.
Okay. Now here's the real question. Should all of us be having more children in order to save money in taxes?
Yes.
Is there an adopt a child sort of system where we can just adopt children at tax time and then have someone else take care of them and feed them and whatnot? Well, run us through a couple of, I know there's the problem with, I hate on radio when I get asked, well, what about the average family? Well, what the heck's an average family these days? But, maybe run us through a couple of your favorite scenarios, Jeff, and let people know just the kind of changes we're talking about.
Okay. So we have 34 different scenarios here, so it gets pretty complicated. But let's say you're a single income family in Ontario earning $30,000 a year. You're going to get some big savings of almost $1,600 a year. So especially that low income, that's quite a bit. A two income family in Saskatchewan earning $80,000 a year will save $1,400. And so Quebec's interesting because they pay lower federal tax rates. So the elimination of the UCCB affects them a little differently. But they're a one income family earning $100,000 a year will save, that has two kids will save $164. So quite a bit less than other scenarios. The scenarios where there's income splitting, sometimes you're going to lose a lot of money. Yeah. That's where we get up to in certain situations, losing about $2,000, being $2,000 worse off.
Yeah.
And does that depend on your income? Like which kind of families that would be income splitting would be affected to that degree?
Yeah, the more extreme examples of income splitting where you're getting the full benefit. So someone making a fairly high income and then the other person making nothing. That's where you see this big effect. And that's especially pronounced once you start making over $200,000 because then you're getting hit, especially if you're getting hit by the increased tax rate, and you're also getting hit by the means testing of the child benefit.
Right. So one thing that, is kind of a big deal here in Alberta, and just based on what you just said, so there were some tax increases at the higher tax brackets for those earning higher salaries. And in Alberta, we had the same thing. You know, these changes come into effect, which are going to be higher taxes on those earning more. So I know that the effects were even greater in Alberta. But so what did we see in terms of the hikes on high income earners?
Yeah, so the big tax increase is a new federal tax rate for income over 200,000. So that's going up from 29% up to 33%. But interestingly, your taxes will actually federally go down for all income between 45,000 and 216,000, because if you make more than 90,000 a year, you're getting the full benefit of the middle class tax cut, which is maximum of $670 per person. So that kind of doesn't get clawed back entirely until you make over 216,000.
Right. Okay. So it's the really high income earners. But I mean, here in Alberta, you know, it's really easy always to say, oh, tax the rich or eat the rich, they can afford it. But, you know, it's a concern here, you know, especially where we have industries that involve a lot of, you know, you want talented engineers, and, you know, it goes beyond our industries. Obviously, we're talking about oil and gas and our resource sector, but doctors, you know, professors, those high salary people, you want to attract top talent because you want the very best surgeons, people like that, where it does make it tricky when you're really, I mean, people in Alberta saw a huge increase if they're high income earners to their taxes, or they will under these Trudeau tax changes and the Notley tax changes provincially.
Yeah, it's a big problem, especially at a provincial level, because people can just move. Well, exactly. People don't have to live in Alberta. They move somewhere where they're going to pay lower taxes, and you know, it matters on a national level as well. Doctors don't have to live in Canada. If you know, they can go down to the States, they can go wherever high skilled people are highly mobile. They can go where they're going to get to keep more of their money. And that's going to be a big problem. And another problem with taxing the rich is that you end up not getting as much money and as much revenue from that as you expect. So during the campaign, the Liberals said their tax increase on the wealthy and their tax decrease on the middle class would balance out. It would be revenue neutral. But almost immediately after the election, they said, oh, we screwed up. It's not going to be revenue neutral. You know, there's going to be over $1 billion shortfall. Yeah.
There's a good C.D. Howe report as well that came out about that, just about how taxing the rich generally doesn't generate as much revenue as the politicians are hoping it will, because it is a very flexible tax base. You know, a lot of them are high skilled people, as you said, that are mobile, but a lot of them, you know, might not physically relocate, but they can shuffle their money around, and they do, and it just doesn't tend to generate as much revenue. So that's a really good point.
Jeff, you bring up we haven't used this term in probably since the 90s in Canada, but the brain drain, essentially, where we saw Canadians move south or internationally in order to avoid, or basically to be paid better, avoid taxes and to be paid better. This is a big concern to me, because you've got these tax increases on the wealthy, and you match that with the weakness in the Canadian dollar. So, you know, if you go to America, you get a 40% raise immediately. And then, you know, Trudeau was musing about taking away, you know, small business tax, the ability to be taxed like a small business from doctors and other, you know, health practitioners and lawyers, and, you know, people who usually set up their own little mini corporations, employ a few people, and then that helps them with the tax rate. This could seriously, this could restart the brain drain south. And, you know, I'm curious, I'm hopeful that, you know, these Liberals don't try to do too much too fast, and at least wait and see, you know, what the unexpected consequences of these actions are.
Yeah, well, we stopped hearing about the brain drain for quite a while, because Canadian taxes were getting lower slowly. American taxes were increasing slowly. And with the dollar being on par, that it really wasn't a big issue. There wasn't a big draw to go down to the States. But, you know, in the last couple of years, this has changed dramatically. You know, there's a lot of opportunities in the States, and especially with the stagnation of the economy in large parts of Canada, we're going to have to be competitive with our tax policy. And unfortunately, most governments don't seem to be interested in doing that.
Mm-hmm. And then, Paige, you and I, as provincial directors, we know the feds giveth and the provinces and cities taketh away. So why don't you run us through what's Alberta got planned this year for taxes?
Sure. So, I mean, one thing's definitely clear. this year, in 2016, Albertans are going to be paying more in taxes than they were in 2015. I mean, we've seen a bunch of different tax changes. When the NDP were elected here, they had a platform, and they intended to carry that out right away, and we saw a lot of these changes, quite quickly. So the New Year's tax changes that we're seeing, remembering that, last year, or 2015, we saw income taxes increase, corporate taxes increase, an increase to the big emitter carbon tax, and now we're seeing new changes this year. So first of all, our income taxes went up again. So this is bringing it up to, some people will recall that Alberta had a single rate income tax of 10%, anything over our fairly high personal exemption rate, which was over $18,000, which means that those people who make that don't pay any tax at all. Well, that changed in October, but it's completely changing and in a more dramatic way this year. So we're bringing it up to our top income tax rate is going to be 15%. Which is, a big change from 10% for those high income earners. That's why I say that combined with the high income earner Trudeau tax changes, it's a really, really big impact on many Albertan families. So those went up again. We also see the carbon tax on big emitters. So that carbon tax, not the one that the government had, that's been really newsy here, that's going to be on all consumers, but the one that was basically on the resource companies that were having big emissions. That tax went up on January 1st, 2016. We're also seeing insurance premiums taxes. Another thing that the Alberta government is doing is taxing really necessities, which is unfortunate. So, last year we saw our gas taxes go up. Under the carbon tax, we're going to see gas prices go up again. We're going to see home heating be increased, the price of that. And another one of those things is insurance premiums. Everybody buys insurance, and the insurance premium tax hikes are going to be coming into effect at the start of April of this year. So we are seeing a lot of changes. That's just this year. Next year, we're going to see that carbon tax on, the broad-based carbon tax on all consumers come into effect in 2017. One of my New Year's predictions is that the NDP here, the government is going to probably raise more taxes because they're very much under the impression that they have a revenue problem and not a spending problem, haven't done anything to reduce their bloated spending, which is, much higher in terms of the national average compared to the national average on per capita program spending here in Alberta. So that's unfortunate. But by and large, like I said, although of course many Albertans are benefiting from the Trudeau tax changes in terms of that middle income tax cut, if we can call it that, by and large, Albertans are definitely going to be paying more tax in 2016 than they were last year.
Jeez.
What's going on in your province?
Yeah, in British Columbia, the Liberal government assiduously avoids trying to raise taxes. However, they'll raise every fee and levy you pay. So here in BC, income taxes stay the same, but the medical services premium tax, which is a separate bill that British Columbians receive to help pay for the healthcare system, raises about $2.5 billion a year. That's gone up again. This is actually the 10th straight annual increase to this tax. 6 years ago, this tax was 40% less than it is today. So to put that in perspective, 6 years ago, I would write a check every month for $108 for my family to the BC government. Now I have to write a check for $150 a month. And that tax is the same whether you make $30,000 a year or $3 million a year. You pay basically that head tax. So that's gone up again. Although we're, for the first time, seeing real pushback from the public now. I think that $150 is crossed the threshold in people's mind. And there's a petition out that has more than 50,000 signatures on it already, demanding that the BC government change the system. So we're working on that, hoping that someone will listen to us. And then there's the usual car insurance has gone up again. There's a car insurance government monopoly in British Columbia. You have to buy it through the ICBC Insurance Corporation of British Columbia. Of course, they've raised their rates because, hey, no competition, right? So no reason not to. That's about $45 more a year. BC Hydro, again, the electrical monopoly here in BC, government monopoly, they've raised their rates again. 2 years ago, they raised them 12%. Last year, 6%. This year, only 4%. I mean, hey, we're trending in the right direction. Forget the compounded increases from the previous years. But that's gone up. And then BC Ferries, big thing for people living, obviously British Columbia, the coastline of Canada. We have quite a comprehensive ferry system, but those rates are going up as well. Those fares almost 2%. So all that put together, plus your property, your municipal taxes. We've been telling people not to go out and go crazy spending their Trudeau middle-class tax cut money, because they're probably going to need it to pay all of these provincial bills.
Yeah, that's a great point. Here in Alberta, property taxes are up too. I didn't even touch the municipal side of things. There's just so many tax increases to keep track of. But the fees, that's a good point, right? Because that's something that, it's not in the news as much. You don't see it in the headlines, but they add up. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's do some 2016 predictions. And, obviously Prime Minister Trudeau promised in the election campaign a $10 billion deficit for this year. No one thinks he's going to make that. Anyone have should we have a prediction what the exact deficit number will be in the first Trudeau budget? I want to hear Jeff's, and then I'm going to steal his answer.
I want to hear Jeff's.
Yeah. I haven't really run the numbers or anything, but I'm guessing probably over 20 billion, maybe 25.
Whoa.
He's making lots of promises. He's throwing around money, every day. It's something new, more promises. We'll see.
Yeah, I was going to say around 20, but doubling that is crazy. That's a lot of money that you're talking about, but he's certainly gone over and above his spending commitments that he talked about in the campaign.
I'm going to say 19, and here's why. It's that old supermarket thing where, if it's $2.99, it doesn't seem as bad as $3. So I'm going to say he somehow sneaks in under 20 billion, 19.8, something like that. We didn't double it. It was only 98% more. Come on. Any other federal predictions? Who's going to merge in the conservative side?
That's interesting. So I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about this. First of all, I do tend to think that Peter MacKay is going to jump back into politics in the race in terms of the conservative leadership race. And I don't know how that's going to play out, because the Conservative Party has been sort of Alberta focused for a while, or so they've been accused of being, because of course, they've got Jason Kenney, they've got Stephen Harper, Michelle Rempel, some of their, prominent people being from Alberta. I think probably Jim Prentice wanted to jump in at some point, but kind of let that opportunity slip by here in Alberta by taking his ball and going home after losing the by-election, or after losing the provincial election and causing a big unnecessary by-election that people here were pretty mad at him about. In terms of people in the party, that's a tricky one for me. I wonder about Jason Kenney. I don't know. What do you guys think in terms of possible leadership contenders?
Yeah, the election went so badly that I think it looks bad on everyone who was in the government.
Right.
So I think people will be trying to look for someone from outside of the Harper system. And for me, the most obvious person is Brad Wall. Move things just ever so slightly to the east.
Yeah. But does he know French? That's the big question.
Well, there's always rumors that he's learning.
I know.
And if they're true,
he has said no multiple times. Now, I know you have to say no until you say yes, but
yeah, that's true. Yeah. He has, but I think he'd be popular. I think among conservatives he'd be popular. I mean, he's kind of a straight shooter, right? Says it like it is. In terms of his comments that he's made on things like equalization, I think it'd be hard for him to get anybody, from Eastern Canada, steal any of those seats back from the Liberals. That would be tricky for him. But I do think that he'd probably be popular among a lot of those, red meat conservatives.
If you want the crazy scenario, you'd have Ted Cruz lose the presidential nomination, then come back to Canada and run for the Conservatives, and then have the Liberals launching a bunch of just visiting ads.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes. The Conservative thing is perplexing to me because there doesn't seem to be anyone emerging. You mentioned Peter MacKay. I do know that in the weeks following the election, he was making a lot of phone calls out British Columbia way to a number of organizers, but it was more temperature taking than anything else, it sounded like. So I go with Jeff a little bit. Like, an outsider seems to make the most sense. That's the model in British Columbia. Gordon Campbell became a terribly unpopular premier. He left. The BC Liberals brought in an outsider, a radio host named Christy Clark, and she won a surprise majority re-election. I'm not sure who those people are.
Exactly. I have no idea.
Yes. If you're one of those people and you're watching right now, feel free to send us an email and float your name, because
please let us know. We're curious.
We're happy to do that. I had a random dream about Alberta the other night, and Paige, 5 words for you. Not this year, but maybe. Stephen Harper, Premier of Alberta.
That is something that has been talked about. So I don't personally see it. I mean, I just think that going from prime minister to a situation where, there is a possibility where you might lose. Alberta politics has been weird lately. So I don't see it happening. But then again, I don't really think he would lose. Another name I've heard floated is Jason Kenney. There's been a lot of talk here in Alberta about uniting the right. If they hope, to hold any chance of ousting the NDP in the next election. There's been definite talks between the Wildrose and the PCs, and I think there's really a big question mark as to who would lead that coalition. So I've heard Stephen Harper floated. I know people have been seeing him around Calgary now in bars and stuff, and everybody's sort of,
get a selfie.
Wow, he's a normal person.
A selfie with Stephen Harper.
Yeah. But I heard Jason Kenney's name as well. Now, obviously, I don't know. I'm so removed from the partisan stuff. I don't have any idea of what's really going on in any of their heads. But I have heard, it would be the ideal for a lot of these people if one of those people from the federal scene came down and led this new coalition and maybe had a shot of ousting PNP.
Worked for Jim Prentice.
That's a little collar tugger there.
Yeah. All right, and then lastly, U.S. presidential race. Who are the nominees, and who's going to win in November?
Well, so I'm thinking that Bernie Sanders. I mean, there's no way that he could be the candidate, right? I mean, there's no way. I mean, he's so far left. I think for the States, that's just. Although he's fun to watch. Like, I mean, you have to respect a candidate who says what he's thinking and says it like it is.
Oh my God, Paige is feeling the burn. She's feeling the burn.
How cool would it be to see Bernie Sanders Trump? I mean, that would just be the most straight shooting, politically incorrect race ever. So that would be funny. But I mean, I'm gonna have to say, obviously Hillary on the Democratic side. When it comes to the Republicans, I think that people here in Canada are, Trump's so wacky and all the crazy things that he says. But I think that when it comes to candidates like him, that might be saying as controversial and, downright offensive in some cases, things that he's saying, you don't underestimate the candidate that there is a potential of a silent majority agreeing with, although not telling their friends at their dinner parties that they agree with, but maybe would kind of silently agree with him and vote for him. So I think that there might be an underestimation of Trump, from people here in Canada. But then again, gotta love a Canadian. So Ted Cruz could be a contender too.
That's some good bet hedging there by Paige. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah. I think once the primary votes start actually happening, that pretty quickly the anti-Trump vote will coalesce around someone. My guess it'll be Marco Rubio. He just seems to be the most acceptable to the highest number of people. But I think he'll probably end up losing to Hillary.
Well, that's the thing. Like, do you think he could take on Hillary? Like, I think that they.
Yeah, but I don't think Trump can either.
Yeah. Well,
he has a much better shot than. You certainly can't win the presidency without the Latino vote, and I don't think Trump's getting it. Rubio might be able to get some of it, but I still don't think enough.
Yeah, that's true. That's interesting. But you don't think Ted Cruz?
It may be Ted Cruz, but he's kind of less acceptable to everyone.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I am going to firmly plant my flag with the Donald. I think he will be the nominee. I think he's doing more data stuff than people let on. I think if he weathers the storm, because he's not going to win Iowa, but I think he might surprise in New Hampshire, and then from there it gets pretty interesting. So I think it'll be Trump versus Clinton. And I don't know, like, can Trump pick an establishment VP candidate? Like, can he pick a Rubio to run on the ticket? Or do you think he has to pick an outsider because he's so wild?
I think he could pick an establishment VP candidate, but I don't think that in any way it would make him any more establishment from doing so, because obviously he's going to overshadow anyone. So I have been hedging my bets, but I will say that from the start, I have been saying it'll be Trump. I actually do think that. I think that there's a lot of similarities in terms of the campaigning style, although Trump is, way more in the deep end than Rob Ford was. But, Rob Ford was the kind of candidate in Toronto who people
Trump is more in the deep end than Rob Ford. Oh my God, what's happened to him?
Maybe not when you're talking
about a migraine.
Like that.
Well, when it comes to policy,
for sure. But Rob Ford was the kind of candidate who people didn't like to tell their, friends in Toronto at dinner parties that they would be voting for. But then he got the largest amount of direct votes in Canadian history of any candidate. So there obviously was that silent majority at play there. And I do think that is why people are underestimating Trump. And I do think Trump's going to take it. But yeah, whether or not he can beat Hillary, that's the big question.
I think generally Americans elect presidents in direct reaction to the last president, and you don't get any further from Obama than Trump. And
that is true.
Hillary's campaign is underwhelming to me. I mean, brilliant organizationally, but what happened to the 90s Clintons pushing back against everything, and the war room stuff, it just seems old and musty, and Trump's doing something different that I'm not sure anyone has a playbook for. So what the heck? Why not? The Simpsons predicted in 2000. Let's go along with it. I'll say President Trump.
That's awesome. They did. I forgot about that.
That's right. And then we'll have the wall built across the Canadian border. Any other predictions? Anything else anyone wants to throw out on the record that they want credit for at the end of the year?
Yeah, I have a random one that marijuana won't be legalized in 2016.
Oh.
That we'll have to wait at least another year.
Well, I've seen some stuff about international treaties about how that.
Yeah, I don't think that matters.
No?
It didn't matter to Washington or Oregon or.
Exactly, that's true.
Yeah, that's just noise, but I think they'll really take their time with this.
Yeah, they should. I mean, you're only gonna get one crack at doing it, so do it right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, well, waste of the week. So this is an example of how government's wasting your hard-earned tax dollars. And for this one, we're going to go to Kelowna, British Columbia, a mid-sized city of about 120,000 people, gorgeous Okanagan Valley. Paige, have you been to Kelowna?
I have. I adore the Okanagan.
It's the best. Jeff, have you ever been to the Okanagan?
No.
Oh, my gosh.
I haven't.
You got to plan a trip. It's a tourist hotspot. Beautiful lakes, wineries. It's kind of like the Muskoka of BC, but less snooty and pretentious. People here love Kelowna, and also they have liquor stores that are open past 9 o'clock. Now, 2 years ago, Kelowna City Council surveyed their 900 municipal employees and found that 7 in 10 were highly satisfied with their jobs. And of course, who wouldn't be? Municipal pensions, benefits, you never get fired, great pay. That was great. This year, Kelowna, though, announced that they're going to raise property taxes 4.1%. That's more than twice the rate of inflation. And one of the things that this tax hike will go to is to cover another survey of their employees, this time costing taxpayers $70,000. That's $80 per staffer to survey them. The media is chafing at this. A lot of residents are pretty upset with this. $80 a head for an employee survey seems a little bit out of whack. That means you can take every employee to a really nice dinner at the Keg and get their opinion on what's going on in Kelowna. But for us, of course, that's our waste of the week this week. And that's it for this episode of Tax Talk from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Be sure to follow Paige on Twitter at Paige McP. Jeff is at JBose2, and I'm at Jordan Bateman. If you're watching this on Blab, be sure to subscribe to our feed, give us props, all that good stuff. And if you're listening to this on iTunes, please subscribe and give us a good rating. You can check out our website and all of our work at taxpayer.com, including Jeff's multi-page report on year-end tax changes, in which he goes through pretty much every income tax scenario that he could dream up to see exactly what the effect of the Trudeau tax cuts and tax increases on the upper class will do. Tax Talk will return next week. I will be on assignment in a way, so Paige will be in. We think we might talk. She might talk about the First Nations Financial Transparency Act, which inexplicably the Liberals seem to hate, and we think is important. But keep an eye on taxpayer.com/tax talk for our guests for that show, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks. It's great joining you.